Welcome to Morning Message for October the 15th. Half of my cousins happened to be Newfoundlanders, and when they came to visit us in Dartmouth, it seemed to me that one of the things that we regularly did in terms of an adventure, in terms of a day trip, would have been to drive to the Annapolis Valley, do a few things there, visit some vegetable stands and that sort of thing, and no doubt buy as much corn on the cob as we needed. We would eventually make our way across the province to the South Shore and hang out at a beach, go swimming in the waves and that sort of thing, almost inevitably ending up at Graves Island, where we probably boiled the corn. And then we would be back home probably just around the time of dusk that day. Wonderful adventures, fond memories of those days. And one of my favorite things to do in the Annapolis Valley was to visit Grand Pré. And I love to go there any time of year. In fact, I kind of like it, especially in the off-season, to walk around the grounds where the church is and that sort of thing. But I also like that reclaimed land that's just beyond there, that the Acadian settlers reclaimed and farmed. But halfway across, I like to stop and just spend time there on the flats. When my sister went to Acadia University on Fridays, it would be my responsibility sometimes to go pick her up and bring her home for the weekend. And I always went early. I'd always go down there an hour and a half before her class had ended, and I would go out and visit Grand Pré. Sometimes, walk the grounds of the church, but very often, most often, I would go out halfway across the flats there and just stop, turn off the radio, turn off the car, and just be in the presence of the divine. It is, for me, one of those thin places where the veil between earth and heaven seems very thin, and to access God, to access the divine, seems very easy for me in a place like that. Another place would be Peggy's Cove, and particularly the day after a storm when the waves were big. And I remember lots of times Dad and I going out there to take pictures of the waves, and I really enjoyed that as well. A place of majesty, a place where the power of creation is so very obvious, and it is one of those thin places for me as well. That phrase, thin place, the first time I heard it, it was in reference to a place called Iona, an island in the Hebrides off the coast of Scotland. And there's a rebuilt abbey there, and there's a community that has formed around the abbey. And I took a youth group there many years ago. And one of my favorite things to do, because when you're there on retreat, you're given chores. My chore for the week happened to be cleaning some showers. So I'd rush at that after breakfast, and I wanted to get it done as quickly as I could so that I could go down towards the Abbey. We were staying at the McLeod Center, which isn't far from the Abbey itself, but there's a little bluff just across the way from the Abbey, and I used to climb that little bluff and sit there and watch people going into the Abbey for morning worship, and watch this group of young people that had traveled with us run and laugh on their way to church, on their way to the Abbey. And I'm sure that they didn't laugh and skip and run to church when they were back home in Bridgewater, but they certainly did there on the island of Iona. And for me, that is symbolic of the fact that for them as well, Iona was a thin place. It was a place where truly that veil between earth and heaven seemed particularly thin, and accessing the divine was easier in places like that. Now the reality is that I'm not going to get to Iona anytime soon. I'm probably not going to be in Grand Pré or Peggy's Cove on a regular basis. So it becomes incumbent upon me to find thin places here in Prince Edward Island. And this brings me to my point today. Those are places that I've named that where I find it easier. That might be different for you. I'm sure the crofters on Iona feel differently about Iona than the people on retreat or the day trippers or something like that. The people that drive that road around Grand Pre on a regular basis probably don't feel about it the same way as I do. So one person's thin places is not another person's thin places. And that speaks to me to speak to a particular reality, and that is that there are thin places all over the place. Thin places are the places where we make space to allow them to be thin places. So wherever you're at, if that thin place for you is nearby, go to it. If it's not, then make the place where you're at a thin place. Because I think that veil is thin everywhere. Wherever we happen to be, we're able to access the divine. We're able to access God. God is freely available to us wherever we may be. And my hope and prayer for all of you today is that you're able in some way to access the divine more fully in your life. Because whatever room you happen to be, wherever you happen to be as you're watching this, is a place, a thin place, where the veil is so thin between earth and heaven, where God is accessible to you. I don't want to kind of create something that seems impossible for us, and I'm not saying that this is a process that's easy. What I am saying is that we can create those thin places in our lives. We don't have to go to the island of Iona. We can find those thin places where we're at. Seek, and ye shall find those thin places in your life. God bless. Amen.